Okay, so we will start. So I'm really pleased to welcome everybody. Thank you to everybody in the audience, and thank you for everybody on the panel right now. I'm Uli Baer. I'm professor at New York University and the director of the Center for the Humanities. And we're really thrilled to have two very special guests tonight, Jennifer Homans and Alice Shepard, who I will introduce in a moment. And this is a joint effort and collaboration between the Center for the Humanities, the Center for Disability Studies, and the Center for Ballet and the Arts. We are three different units at New York University, all working together closely, but this is actually our first direct collaboration. So we're really pleased and excited to do this. And we're especially thrilled that you're here to participate and to listen to Alice and Jennifer, and to also watch and hear and take this in, this kind of event, which is really trying to build community. I also want to thank the people assisting us today and really enabling us, which are the captioner, Josh Edwards, and the ASL interpreters, Candace Davider and Jody Pricehook. Thank you so much for being here and for working with us. And I will hand it in a moment to my friend and colleague, Mara Mills here, who is a professor in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication in Steinhardt, who has published widely in the area of disability and is the co-editor of Testing Hearing, The Making of Modern Orality, and a range of other articles. And Mara will actually have a few more comments about how this event is going to work. And we're really pleased and really excited to have Jennifer Homans and Alice Shepard here. So Jennifer Homans is the director of the Center for Ballet and the Arts. She's the author of Apollo's Angels, A History of Ballet, a sweeping book that analyzes the status and the history of ballet in sort of, let's say, modern civilization, and uses this lens to look at ballet and dance and mobility in general to take stock of where we are as a culture, where we've been, where we've come from, where we're going to go to. Jennifer is the recipient of Guggenheim and Coleman Fellowships, and she's really the woman who's moving a lot of things and puts them in motion. And one of the things, Jennifer, you've done is you put the Center for Ballet and the Arts at NYU with major support from the Mellon Foundation, and you're bringing fascinating, transformative individuals here to our community, one of whom is Alice Shepard. So we're just really pleased, Jennifer, to have you here. I'm remiss not to thank your colleagues and staff, Andrea Salvatore, Sabrina Udelson, Lauren Keel, Molly Rogers, and Kyla Bowen in the Center for the Humanities. So the other people who worked on this event. And Alice, I cannot be even more enthusiastic to see you actually on screen. I've seen you on screen and recordings, and I'm really happy. I also want to point out to the audience, as Alice reminded me, we like to call ourselves middle-aged. As you can hear, if you can hear me right now, or you can determine I have an accent. I'm a European, so I'm a white male wearing a black sweater, and I'm coming to you from New York City because I'm actually close to the NYU campus. So Alice is a fellow this year at the Center for Ballet, a choreographer and dancer, and someone who creates movement that, how I understand it, and I really can't wait to hear you actually talk and show us, movement that challenges and expands conventional understandings of disabled and dancing bodies. She's also the founder and director, and there she is kind of paired well with Jennifer. You're also a woman who moves and puts things in motion. So you're the founding and director of Kinetic Light, which I understand to be the first professional collaborative place and platform for disability, dance, technology, and design. And you have transformed the field of dance in productive and enriching ways. So I can't wait to have you today. I'm so thrilled and excited to have Jennifer Homans here, who convenes this, and to have Alice here. You convene things in different ways and create a new kind of community also for us at the Center for the Humanities. So thank you for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Mara, who's going to have a few comments. I will get off the video now for people who are following us orally, and I will come back on in about 40 minutes, and we'll have also questions from the audience. So if you want to participate, please use the chat function and tell us or communicate with us in the ways that work for you, and we will try to respond to everybody who's participating. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, this is Mara Mills from the Center for Disability Studies. I'll be brief. I'm the access doula for the event, and I'll just explain a few things about accessibility, and then I'll click off. To describe myself, I'm also middle-aged white woman with brown curly hair about chin length. I'm sitting in NYU housing about 5 floors below Uli, who was just speaking. I have a white wall behind me with a sort of gold thread tacked to the wall. It's not quite as nice as what Uli has done. His background is wilderness sort of tree wallpaper, which I really admire. So for those of you who are interested in closed captioning, if you've used Zoom a lot, you probably know this, but you can click on the CC button at the bottom, and we have live captioning, as Uli mentioned, from Joshua. If the captioning interferes with your view of the ASL interpreters, you can adjust the dimensions of the Zoom window on your computer. This is a little harder on mobile. You can also adjust the caption size, and I'll drop a link with the instructions for how to do that in the chat. And if you have any access difficulties at all during the event, feel free to mention it in the chat and I will respond. Thanks.
All right, so Jennifer and Alice, it's your turn now. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mara, again, and take it away.
So I'm Jennifer Homans. I'm a white woman, middle-aged, with long brown hair, longer than usual, thanks to COVID. And I'm sitting in my study with some wood panels and a blank wall. And I'm so pleased to be here with Alice, and I'll let her introduce herself and then we will begin.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation and for also being here tonight. It's a thrill and a pleasure. I'm Alice Shepherd. I'm a light-skinned Black woman with quarantine curls, light green scarf, slightly darker green jumper, and a white wall with some art on the background behind me. To get us started, something about the format tonight. Jennifer and I are going to be talking. We set ourselves up for what we thought of or called as an honest conversation about the issues of disability in dance. And we're also going to show 2 or 3 videos, depending on time and the arc of the conversation. And we would like to make sure that you have access to those videos in a disability accessible way, and also in an internet friendly way, so that you're not relying on anyone's lumpy internet connection. So to sort that part out, if you could possibly navigate over to the link that Sabrina has put into the chat box, that is https://vimeo.com/showcase/7638610. It will ask you for a password, which is in all caps NYU spacebar CBA. That's NYU spacebar CBA. When you get there, you will find 3 videos, each arranged in 3 different types. And I think I've been consistent about this. On the leftmost side are the video versions with what we're calling no access, meaning no audio description, no captions, or no ASL. The second one in, where necessary, will provide ASL and open captions, or if there is no ASL, it is just simple audio description. The third one over is audio description with open captions. And that is consistent for each of the 3 video clips. Please keep that video at the top of your, around somewhere in your computer world so that you can move backwards and forwards on it. And I would say, let's get started by watching the first one that I'm calling WGSF. no in whatever version you need, be that no access, ASL, or open captions. So navigate over and take a moment and enjoy the dance. And Jennifer and I will be back as soon as it's over. All right, give yourselves a moment to come back on over. Welcome. And Jennifer, over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Alice, for that. Look, let's just start. I mean, it's such a a film clip that's so full of movement and vitality and life, and you're in a hurry and you're moving fast, and it has all of that feeling of movement and the things that I associate with dance. So let me just start by asking you, you know, you're a disabled woman, you're a dancer. How do you see those things together? You know, what is disability for you as a dancer?
Thank you. You know, this question is the hardest one. And you know, people should know that the in our prep calls, we circled around this time and time again, of like, what is disability in dance? And the place I want to start with is actually what disability is not. Um, Disability in dance is not necessarily about the functionality of a particular body or mind. So part of that trick is recognizing that often disability is coded as a failure of body or mind in some particular way, and that any kind of artistic practice that lives that lives with the artist is set upon disability as a kind of despite relationship. So despite this disability, she can still move through the streets quickly. And here, for the purposes of audio description, I am gesticulating wildly with my hands and arms to give sort of verbal movement emphasis to it. So it's not a question of despite disability in my world, but it is a question of because of disability. And then secondarily, because of practiced, trained disability, am I able to do the things that you're doing in the street and you're seeing in the street? And so there's a kind of negotiation of both the relationship of disability in dance itself and the necessity of dance technique, which informs how my street work, how I move through the street. So does that make sense to you as a starting point?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm wondering, you know, let's talk about the training a little bit, because I wouldn't know, you know, what was your training? How did you learn to dance? I mean, I gather from what I know about you know, you, that these two things kind of came together at a moment, you know, that you started dancing with disability. And so that was always part of there's something about those two things together in a whole. And so I'm just, you know, I was trained as a dancer too. I don't dance now, not the way you do at all. So I don't have that now, but you know, what I know about dance training is, I think, going to be very different from the kind of training that you gave yourself or acquired as you went through. So can you just talk a little bit about what that was? I mean, what?
Yeah, let's talk. I mean, I think, yeah, if I'm understanding you right, you had a very typical dance training in ballet, is that right?
Well, I did, but you know, it's interesting because my first teacher was actually a man who was had MS, and he was in a wheelchair. And so as a child, with my first ballet teacher ever that I just went to, and to be honest, I don't remember thinking anything of that. I didn't really notice it. It just was so concentrated on what he was telling me to do that it was part of it was just my teacher. So, you know, but I certainly had as you say, I was trained in classical ballet. I was trained in contemporary modern dance as it was at the time. This is, you know, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And so I had, and, you know, with some exposure to flamenco and a few other things, but mainly that.
Yeah, I think of all the disabled artists who are out there working today, you know, I have had a very particular and a unique training experience, and so I think let's just begin to name this. One is there is a kind of stereotypical assumption that disabled dancers can't be trained because which usually amounts to the non-disabled teaching world doesn't actually understand how to train a disabled dancer, which is not the same thing. And I was actually lucky enough to be able to experience multiple kinds of training. I worked with Kitty Lunn, who is a disabled dancer, ballet trained, who has a technique for dancing in a wheelchair. And with Kitty, I was able to actually go to mainstream dance classes, such as the one taught by Kathy Sullivan at Steps, and continue to take mainstream dance classes at Steps, at Peridance, at Gibney, even at DNA when it was DNA prior to Gibney. So I've been able to move through a conventional dance training. But it hasn't been a positive experience, I have to say, for the most part, because the teachers who understand, who are able to say, okay, I'm here, let's do this, are few and far in between. Mostly what tends to happen is the assumption that everything I do is going to be in deficit relationship to anything else that is going on in the class. And so it will be adaptive. You know, maybe I can't move my legs, assumes the teacher. So maybe all I will do is move my arm, or I can, you know, and so everything comes into this kind of adaptive version where nothing I'm doing is recognized as legitimate in itself. It's just some version of something else that I can do because, you know, it's what I can do.
So Alice, give me
So
a picture. What was it like? You'd be in a ballet class or a
when
and
it was
what?
going wrong, yeah,
And you'd be asked to do
yeah,
something and
yeah. I mean, it would start from the beginning. Um, you know, one of the very first classes I went to, the teacher said, well, okay, all you can do is the port de bras. And that really just isn't true. Um, another class I went to posted
so what
security
could you do
guards.
besides the port de bras that they weren't allowing you? Where was the, so there's a gap here. There's a gap between what you feel and what you can do and what they are and their assumptions, right? So what's
Right.
inside that gap? I mean, because this must have been where you were able to really sort of develop yourself as a dancer, right? In terms of filling that gap.
Yeah. So some teachers were really, really supportive, and they
Mhm.
recognized that the gap actually is not about what I can and cannot do.
Right.
You know, it is not about whether or not I can get my leg up or even stand on it, but it is, can I find a way to actually express with my body within the vocabulary of a mainstream dance technique? And that would mean, can I turn my wheelchair? Can I move? Am I pushing? What is the actual relationship of a push to an arm a position? You know, what is going on here? What is the body? Some teachers were able to actually recognize that there is an expressive body that is seeking to express within a certain technique and vocabulary, and they were willing to go with it. Others would just not be able to, would be so destabilized that there is a question that you know, I would just
Yeah.
sit in the back and do my own thing. So there was a range of experience there, but the key is actually not focusing on, well, not initially allowing the perception of ability to structure the actual kind of instruction. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, it's interesting to me because I think of training as a kind of, I think of it as a kind of metamorphosis. I mean, what are dancers trying to do in most techniques that I know anything about anyway? You know, they're trying to actually change their bodies. They're trying to become something else. They're trying to almost carve a statue out of their physical flesh and being. They're trying, in whatever way that is. There may be different modalities, but they're trying to sort of shape the body. But you have an added, as I see it when I watch your performances, you have an added thing, which is you've got to shape your body, but within the mechanism of your, in at least one case, chair, right? So
Right,
there's a
right.
certain complexity there in what you're doing, and I'm just wondering how that feels, because I think of that training as kind of like, you know, trying to maneuver my body into various positions or figure out the physicality of it, and you're having to deal with something that's also not physically part of your body that you have to control in a different way. So that's an interesting thing, I think, you know, in terms of body as machine, you know, because body as machine, body as
Yeah, right.
dancer.
So let's go back to the beginning on that. I'm going to say that my chair is my body.
Okay.
It neither supplants or nor replaces any other part of my body. It just is my body. It's not a tool, prop, or extension. And it is my body, and I am using it in deeply focused, highly technical ways. And I think, and this is actually where training is not necessarily, is something of a problem. If I wanted to be taught by another wheelchair user, there are very few places and very few people who can do that. But believe you me, there is a technique, there's an art and a craft to pushing a chair, And so part of my technique is to think through not how do I change my body, but really what is going on in such a way that I can carve expression and that my body can repeatedly, safely um, find its own expression and find expression within known and stylized conventional dance techniques. But whatever I'm doing is I need to be able to actually start with the chair as my grounding. The chair is the way I contact the floor. The chair is how I move. And, you can, well, actually, this is a question, people turn to the flashy moves. And, the flashy moves are what signal that I may be a good dancer. But actually, the hard part are the things that you don't see. The ability to turn without hands on the wheels precisely, or the subtlety of one finger, and I'm holding up literally one finger, to drive a wheel across the stage, the finessing of feathering or touching or stroking and pulling. These are not codified, but there are techniques to them, and they are as critical to my expression as a dancer as they are to each thing I do is thought about in the same way each step is thought about. And so I train for that, by which I simply mean I practice. I
Right, right.
practice.
You
Yeah.
practiced the way we saw in the film. In a way, you were going forward, back, forward, back. You said something in one of the things I watched about when you said I feel it in the wheels.
Mm.
You said I feel it in the wheels, and that struck me so much because that's in a way part of what you're talking about is you feel there's some connection that's very organic for you with the way that you're able to move.
Yeah, I think this is, and I think this is something that as a dancer, right? You know how your body works in space, right? You are highly, you're highly on. You have a sense of proprioception where you are in space. Your body interprets the ground for you. You know when you're going uphill. You know when the ground is cold, the floor is cold, and you know those things both on stage and off stage. And it's similar for me. The chair is massively responsive. It's you know it it interprets the world in a very physical way. There's vibration, there's sound, there's the labor of going uphill and the pleasure of coming downhill. And so I'm constantly getting a stream of information about the world. Is the Mali too padded? Is the Mali fast, what we call fast Mali, or is it too soft? Are there unevennesses in the floor? And so, I am living and knowing the world by what my chair tells me.
I mean, it's interesting that it strikes me that what you were saying about the virtuosity lies in basically the transition steps, the in-between steps, the things that are the push, the pull, the ways in which you are getting, which is of course also true for anybody working on their feet on the floor. It's not the big jumps or it's the in-between steps, the way you link things, the way that is in fact the greatest sign of a sort of refined technique. I'm wondering whether we should watch the chair at this moment because we're
we can
talking
do
about
that.
the chair. Shall we do that?
Can do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So just give me one moment because I
Okay.
want to complexify it.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Right. Because here I love what you said about virtuosity and technique, but I also want to flag that this is what it means to have virtuosity and technique in non-disabled land. And sometimes what we will call crip aesthetic or disability aesthetic, is in the moments where the art is found in the non-replication of normative perfection and control. Does that make sense? So
Right, say
there's
that again, in the non-replication of, I see, okay.
right. So
So,
part of what I
so working against some image that you have in your mind of what it might be if you weren't disabled, is that it?
right. So that, you know, sometimes disability aesthetic deliberately fragments or challenges or you know the seamlessness. Sometimes disability aesthetic surfaces that there is no seamlessness. And so that's part of what, you know, I like to be able to play in both worlds. I like to be able to demonstrate what we would call normative technique, and in that kind of control, but also be active and thinking about what disability aesthetic does as it plays with those ideas of normative technique and control. So
But don't
that
you
kind
think
of,
that most artists do that? Most artists themselves do that. And this is an act of art that's coming from the point of view of your disability, but it's in fact an artistic, that's an artistic pursuit.
I agree. I mean, I totally agree with you there, because I think what's important about that question is that disabled artists haven't often been recognized as having that kind of sophistication. Right? You and I, we've had these conversations and we know this. And you're right about that. But I think there's a way in which the mainstream world can look at disability and say, well, it doesn't have the polish, or it doesn't have the finish, or it doesn't have the thing that I define as virtuosity, when in fact what we're talking about is deliberate artistic choice, as you just pointed out. And it's the interpretive fluency or cultural competency or cultural literacy of the viewer that is missing. And I think, yeah, you're right
Well,
about that.
maybe you could tell us a little bit before we watch the next clip then, because what I'm hearing is that, and I can fully see how this would be, you know, that there's a certain way in which one of the things that you, like, I think like all artists who are, I think like most artists actually are you have to teach your audiences as you go what you're doing. You have to teach your audiences. And so there's a, you know, some of the things that you just described about how you use the wheelchair, people who aren't experienced in watching that might not see it, first of all, not because they don't want to, but because they just don't. And so I'm wondering whether, you know, there's some things that you could point out as we're about to go into this next little clip of seeing you move. And
Yeah, should we do that together?
yeah,
Should we talk about what we see and like take a good look at it and invite folks to collect up perspectives and ideas and insights and comments and dump them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll just sort of figure out what is it that you perceive in this particular video. Should we try that?
yeah, let's go.
Cool. I'm excited. Okay,
Now we
folks.
watch it, right?
Right. So just for a second, I've been watching the chat happen, and I've been seeing that there are a trickiness is getting onto the video page. But we're going to try this again.
Okay.
We're going to go straight over to the same Vimeo page, and hopefully everyone can pick us up. Thank you, Sabrina. The password is all caps NYU space CBA. And so we're just going to try that and take a moment to watch the second video called Revel. And I'm just going to bring up the screen so you can see it on your screens. Okay, choose your access version. All right, so we are now looking at Revel. If folks can come back. Yeah, what do you think? What were you seeing in particular?
Flight.
Yeah.
Flight. I mean, the desire to a sort of feeling of, which I've seen in some of your other work as well, a sort of sense of almost wanting to be weightless. I mean, some of its effect, I don't know. You have to tell us. How did you do that? Were you really up in the air like that? That part we just have to get past. You just have to tell. So,
Oh, so yeah, we were really up in the air like that.
and how do you get up there? I mean, I would,
The
how do you
trampoline.
push off the ground?
Trampolines.
Trampolines. Oh my God, I see. So your wheelchair is on the trampoline.
Yeah.
And then when you're up, how do you come down?
You'll notice that there are no landings shown. You land the same way you would land on a trampoline. If you've nailed it, you land on 2 wheels and then sink in to the fourth wheels. So yeah.
Yeah, the way you just did. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And if
but
not, then you just land.
if you mess it up, however, then you just sort of land flat on your face or flat on your back, or yeah.
So what about the feeling? What are you after there?
I really want people not, I mean, this is a really good example to talk about because it's incredibly big movement, right? All of this kind of bouncing, flying stuff around. And the trick here is to not fall into the trap of flight and freedom despite this disability. Like what happens because she's flying and she's this compensates for the work. The trick here for me is to watch the hands, and I'm holding a hand to the screen so that you can watch when the hand contacts the wheel, when the hand contacts the railing, and the hands are arced or touching each other or curving or carving through space. For me, that makes the art of this versus the kind of the hugeness of flying and cutting through the air. So, I want to have a detailed perspective on those tiny moments versus the largeness of the bounce, which is of
But
course
maybe they're part of
fun.
the same thing. Maybe they're part of the same thing because that's part of the effect. I mean,
Right.
because there is
Right.
a kind of, I see what you're saying. There is a kind of, yeah, there's obviously detail to the beauty and to the feeling that you achieve, that you
And
evoke in us, that you evoke in the viewer,
right. And you
who
don't
not always, I think is not always thinking, oh, in spite of disabled. No, I don't know. I think, once you're doing it, I didn't feel that.
right. So I think that's the moment, is understanding how all of those things that we just talked about, like actually land in one thing here. I mean, you've got the chair as body. You can't move like that unless the chair is a body. And I think, it's the fullness of full-bodied expression. And I think that's critical. It's also understanding how actually modern dance techniques enable that kind of work, but also understanding that the chair itself has its own virtuosity and its own technique. And all of those things are operative at once in those small bounces and those flights through the air. Yeah, yeah.
You mean the modern dance technique enables it because there's a sense of sort of, down to go up, or the ways in which gravity is governing your
Yeah,
movement,
exactly.
and you're working against it and with it.
Right. So even though you may not recognize or see a formal position or a formal step, everything about a dance technique actually enables that kind of movement and supports that kind of movement. And training in it has enabled our bodies, Laurel and my bodies, to be able to withstand and replicate that kind of movement safely. So it's a combination of techniques, both chair technique and modern dance technique to do that. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's kind of a way in which the body, when you started the conversation, we were like, how do we move? What is technique? What is a body? What is disability? And I think disability is both a lens, an interpretive lens and a practice, and also for these kinds of films, it is a way of expression. It's not that kind of medical diagnosis of the body itself.
Yeah, I mean, that seems evident to me. That seems evident.
In your own practice, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, I mean, there's a sort of obvious connection here that's kind of between the way, I guess there's two things I'm thinking about that I'd love to know your thoughts on. One is the connection to sort of artificial intelligence in the ways in which the body and the machine, I mean, already we're we depend on our phones for our memory. We're outsourcing our memory to a machine. We're connecting ourselves to machines in ways that are not the same as what you're talking about with the chair, because that's so deeply physical. But there's some kind of analogy there in the ways in which human beings and machines are starting to kind of merge in certain ways. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that in terms of your own practice. And
I love to actually do two things, like to engage in technology as other dancers do, but with a recognition that the signification of technology is different for disabled artists. So, one of the things that we've been seeing, for example, is motion capture, and we've seen a number of incredible dance projects come up with motion capture. And we've been, Laura and I have been working on this, and we've worked with other disabled artists. And what we're learning is that the algorithms for interpretation depend on the idealized body. And so the algorithm for interpretation continually correct the skeletal structures of our bodies to make them look and operate within a motion capture environment as a non-disabled dancer's body might. And so we're seeing this kind of notion where technology is corrective or additive, but not necessarily as a disabled person would use it, where we would find it to be generative. And so the intersection between, dance practice here, when we look back through the history of modern dance, when we think through the ways in which dancers have always, dance has been a highly technical and deeply technology-based field. Right? It's rarely is it, just me and you in the environment dancing our hearts out. Dance is a highly technical and technologized field. And the addition of disability into the field complexifies that relationship to technology, not just phones, but it forces us to examine really what does the technology do? And here I love to use etymology. Technology is really a way of knowing and experiencing the world. And our bodies are ways of knowing and experiencing the world. Our minds are ways of knowing and experiencing the world. And we can train them or not. We can allow them to express or not, but that they aren't exterior to us. They are merely parts of us.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, I mean, what kinds of technology are you thinking of in dance? Do you mean in training, in the history of dance, and the training of dancers? There's certainly lots of ways in which the external world has been, dancers use that in order to change their bodies.
Yeah, I was thinking,
and the technical environment of a theatrical production, of course, right? Right.
But even the floor, I mean, the floor is a highly, it's never neutral. The floor is a highly technical thing. And even if you don't you don't necessarily port your floor with you, but the notion of this neutral thing, the starting place, the floor is highly structured. And what that means for dancers is, and for dancers' capacity to execute, and for dancers' bodies to sustain, over the course of time without injury, the floor. I mean, I think first to the floor,
Yeah,
and then to the complexity of theatrical production. And disability changes that, Disability can change light, it can change sound, it can change the experience of a production, and it also changes the rules of production. And that's where the fun comes in.
And how do you how do you work mainly within a disability community, or do you work across these different mediums and different communities, I guess you would say? Or how does that work for you? Is there a kind of wet fluidity there, or are the walls a little less porous?
I would say, in many different ways, your own experience as a dancer and scholar is multidisciplinary and multifaceted, and you've been able to create worlds, convene worlds, and really move through this kind of complex existence of practice and of study, and of work and convening. And so, it's the same very much for me, with the deep, deep and passionate belief that, my work speaks, I want my work to speak to disabled people in very, very different ways from the way it speaks to a non-disabled audience member. And I also want to be in deep relationship and conversation with disabled people. And that's not limited, structured, or defined by similarity of diagnosed impairment.
Right.
You know, that's about how we navigate the art of a performance and what that experience might be. So yeah, definitely. The notion, it feels odd to me to actually situate myself outside of a community context, but to recognize that there are multiple disability communities, and that disability isn't a monolith, but to know that I have a home for my work with some people somewhere. That seems important.
Yeah, that seems important, but you do both. It sounds like you're interested in both. I mean, you too were a scholar at one point in your life, if I can point out. I mean, it's another interesting facet of you that you bring, a great study of literature and of words to you have that part of you as well. So that's part of that's part of your method and your work, I would imagine.
Lots of time in libraries, lots of time in libraries, right? For both of us. And lots of time for me writing. I love the way just being able to writing crafts a word that, if you were to track my movement practice, there's a word practice that goes alongside it. And for me, the relationship between words and movement are really, really critical. They're intimate. They are, they are multiply related in complex ways, which I think allows us to be able to formulate for me, the idea that a dance can exist in words as much as it can exist in movement.
So can you give an example of that? Because that's something I struggle with for sure. I mean, we do often separate these things in our lives, right? There's this nonverbal art form, and then there's these books we read. So, this is also a project I'm very interested in, obviously, as a writer and a critic. And how do you bring these things together? And this act of translation, which is one way, but I don't think it's the only way. And you may have a different sense of what you're trying to do with the sort of boundary between words and nonverbal
Yeah,
mediums.
that yeah, dance originates in the movement of the body or the movement of the mind, but it doesn't have to be experienced as the movement of the body, I think the
Yeah.
thing that that I am becoming more and more committed to in my own work is that even if it starts as a movement, it doesn't have to be experienced as a movement. A movement can be experienced as a word, or it can be experienced as a sensation. And so, what would that mean for dancers to exist in these kinds of multiple experiential formats, even though it was communicated as a movement of the body? So, where in an environment where each of these experiences is held as equal and authentic with its own, both with its own integrity and as an integral expression of the original art form itself. So there's no notion of original or translation. Is that it is balanced by the fact that you know we we start with words and then we end with words, and
So,
you can see some
maybe
of that in
this,
description. Go ahead.
sorry,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, maybe this is a good way for us to move into Descent, which is our last film, because I want to open this
Yeah.
up to people and questions soon. And so, maybe you could talk for a moment about Descent, which after all comes from a sculpture, which has a
Yeah.
story, which is a dance.
Which is experienced as poetry and dramatic dialogue and description. And I think the notion for me is that Descent started as an exploration of floor technologies and surfaces for the set itself. It started in relationship to a sculpture which didn't have a story, so it was invented. The story was created for the sculpture. And it can be experienced both as a visual experience of movement. It can be experienced as a poet. Um, we commissioned a poet, Eli Clare, to interpret uh, Descent as poetry. And it can be experienced as description of the movement. And it can be experienced even sonically as the bumps and bangs, as we call it, that you make when your body dances, the breath sounds. And so part of what I want to do is ask, yes, dance starts as a movement art, not necessarily where we change the body, but where we figure out how to make the body express. But it doesn't have to be experienced that way. And so some of the ways that we offer dance I often like to offer dance into the world are in these different formats. Yeah.
Let's watch it. Let's watch Descent then. Let's watch Descent.
Okay. Are we ready to do this for the last time?
Yes.
Are we ready? Okay. Navigate over. And pick your final clip.
Okay, I just want to let people know I'm back. First of all, Alice, thank you so much. Incredible, just incredible. Thank you for sharing this. And Jennifer, if it's okay, there are two questions in the Q&A, if I can take those. They're kind of
Please, go ahead.
they're kind of related, and they're really about something you talked about a couple of minutes ago about teaching and how to convey and communicate. And one of them is how more normative, traditional training, how teachers could improve to accommodate students, that they wouldn't go through part of the experience you described of feeling unaddressed or left out. And the other question is related to somebody, Jess Rulin said that she's a disabled dancer, or he's a disabled dancer, I'm not sure about the pronoun, and how to convey steps without being able to demonstrate while teaching. So it's a question of a teacher communicating to students who are differently or disabled, or for teachers who are able-bodied to teach disabled students. So how do you actually manage that space in a more inclusive, open way?
I'm actually going to ask Jennifer to answer that, because you also have that experience of being taught by a disabled teacher, right? Who wasn't demonstrating.
Yes, I did. I mean, it's funny, one of those things where I didn't even know it was an experience in the sense of something special, because it was just the way it was for me. It was just my first dance teacher. So, I mean, what I saw was, I mean, it may have been partly where my interest in the verbal aspects of dance had some root, because it was just a very elaborate, descriptive, put your right foot front, move your right foot this way, plie on that foot. You don't know what plie is? Okay, now let me tell you, you're going to bend your knee. You know, so just very, very, very discreet, every movement analyzed and threaded together. Difficult. And there was somebody demonstrating sometimes too, but that was also frustrating. So there was some frustration in it, but there was something about the verbal communication that was important and mattered. And I think partly, to address the question a little more directly, it was because no one questioned it, that it was just thought of as, we just accepted it. This is how we were doing it. It wasn't, we didn't discuss it. This is just how we did it.
Yeah.
Alice, can I just ask you something? And Jennifer, maybe a bit general, but watching Descent right now, I was so absorbed, and I was also absorbed very much in the lighting and the camera work and the angles. So there's a kind of holistic experience. And I realized after watching it, I wasn't paying any attention actually that you were using a chair or not. I was just watching the movement, the speed, what's happening, the kind of drama on stage, the interactions between the two dancers. And there's something that's shared between dance and disability studies in the university, which Jennifer touched on. The university is a very cerebral place and actually has a long tradition of actually, in some ways, turning the body invisible unless it is a body that's otherwise, that's queer or Black or different. And otherwise, it's just not really talked about or addressed. And dance is an unusual thing in the university, because unless you're taking a dance class, you come to class and your body is not there. And I'm really interested in this conversation that the body's both foregrounded, and in dance it's and at the same time it's not foregrounded. And something about that, and what you said, what you both of you talked about, writing and words, and large parts of the university and life actually are invested in making certain things invisible. And you started our very conversation saying, as a Black queer woman who's disabled, you actually take up space, and rendering things visible is a really important part of allowing people to see things that they thought they'd understood or could take for granted. And in Descent, in a way, it totally blew up my whole question, because it didn't happen. So.
I mean, I think, can I comment to that? I mean, and also I think, Jennifer, this is partly the seed work that we've been doing here, is when is something visible and when is it not? And what is visible? So to the first part of your question, you know, you realized that you were barely noticing the chair. I wonder if I could rephrase that as you were barely noticing your negative or stigma or pre this conversation interpretations or values or fears or circulars or ideas about what it might mean to move in a chair. Those ideas had fallen away, and something else was happening. Because I mean, I don't think the chair is invisible, right? It really isn't invisible. What's visible or not visible is what you are interpreting. And this is, I think, Jennifer, some of the things that you were saying about what is a norm and what is not a norm. You know, if you are in a class that is routinely taught by a disabled artist, that is a norm for you. And you don't attach this notion necessarily of stigma or deficit to it. That is the norm of how it gets done. Whereas here, what we're surfacing is the question of whose interpretive lens is framing the world. And yeah.
And Alice, what's the goal in the end? Is it to have a moment where there's some kind of a place like the one Uli got to, but without the subtext that you added to it? You know, where there's some sense that there's, what would that be? A kind of more pure experience of it?
You know, the goal, that's a very, yeah, the goal is to ensure that everyone can find their way into the work and experience the work so that they can participate in interpretation and analysis and experience and then be in the moment with the work. And Access does that. It's never complete, it's never perfect, but you know, these kinds of approaches to access with ASL, captions, description, multi-level description, these are ways in which the art form of dance can flex because it is so generative, because dance is so powerful and creative, because bodies are so foregrounded. You know, these are ways in which dance can be experienced. And the work that dancers make can be experienced. And so I think this is a kind of an incredible moment of, of understanding that dance may originate as an expression of the body, but it doesn't have to be experienced that way. It's taken in visually, it's taken in orally, it's taken in tactilely, it's taken in verbally, it's taken in musically. You know, dances, and my goal is to make sure that everyone is in that moment and to has that experience.
Yeah, Alice, if I can say thank you for calling that out. You're totally right. I'm using a frame and lens, and partly watching your work and listening to you is actually to readjust and to become aware of how much of a normative lens I have, with some ability maybe to see certain things and a lot of ability not to see other things. And in some ways, I think what you're doing is to allow us to see more. And I think that's really to start in a place that's grounded. That is how you explain how you actually receive your training, how you actually your technique and what you called virtuosity earlier is grounded in its own way, and it's not only reference to another tradition. And I think that's actually the opening. I wonder whether, Jennifer, you can say something, because Jennifer, we've talked about this in the past, and I'm sure you've talked about it with Alice, that ballet has been regarded and is often criticized as a very European heteronormative white art form. And it needs to, maybe be recentered in other ways, whether you're seeing this also as a step in that direction, because we've talked about that where ballet is today, and how it's maybe misperceived also. I think it's a misperception in a way, because the work we just saw is dance at its highest form. It maybe isn't considered the mainstream, but the point is not to accept the mainstream any longer.
Yeah, I don't know quite how to think about that. I mean, I think, I suppose to me, in a way, there's there are these different traditions, you know, ballet is one of them with a long past and history, which you described quite accurately. But it's also, there have been so many crossings between these various traditions, so many, you know, mixing and matching and stealing and giving and the thing that I always come back to in the end is, yes, you want to keep in mind where it came from, but really what you want to ask is this a powerful artistic experience? And is this, in other words, the way I would see it is this good dance? And is it moving you in some way that you can experience that in any form of dance? And you know, if ballet is being sort of stiff and stultified, which it certainly can be, then it can be pretty intolerable and pretty boring. But it can also be transcendent if it's done in ways that are that manage to create that feeling in people who are watching it. And I think the same goes for the kind of work that Alice is doing. I mean, there's so many different ways in which these things, and there's certainly a ballet influence I can see in your work, Alice, as well, you know, as well as you yourself have pointed out. So there's a kind of way in which these forms are, to me, a little bit less rigidly defined as genres. And I kind of want to open the whole thing up, maybe because I kind of came of age as a dancer in a moment when everybody was crossing over, as they called it. And it was just very fruitful and interesting to be part of that. So closing them off into their categories seems to me not the way to go. Or not the most interesting way to go. I don't know, Alice, what do you think?
You know, I find this intersects really with 2 or 3 of the questions in the Q&A, which touch on disability aesthetics, virtuosity, and dance as a form of display of physical capability. You know, I want to think about it as a form of physical, emotional, and mental expression. And in particular, in my work, I think of a kind of an expression of impairment. Like, my work is about the maximum expression of impairment. That tends to go large. You know, you tend to see huge movements, but that doesn't mean that the dance world shouldn't pay attention to expressions of ideas and feelings in movement that are not small, or that are small, insofar as they are not like flying through the air. Sometimes, you know, sometimes an eye, sometimes a finger, sometimes a tongue, sometimes an eyebrow. You can be as focused and expressive and communicative with that as you can with a jump from a trampoline. And so I think disability aesthetics prizes all of those forms of expression, while simultaneously doing the work to be in conversation of like, what is a pretty fairly codified art form like ballet? You know, is it going to be a ballet if I get on stage and do what I do? And you know, is that going to be ballet? And I think that's actually a critical question. Like, if I am using a standard port de bras, if I'm using standard epaulement, if I'm using, you know, if I am well within the conventions and traveling in space and time with other dancers who are also well within the conventions, is that ballet? And you know, this is a question that I think continues to just kind of rock my world. I don't know how to answer that. But one thing I think is true is that ballet, you know, there's so much room for it to be everything that it is now, and also everything that it isn't. And we're seeing that change. We're seeing that change. It's not so much about it's about the structures that ballet has in place. And you know, some of those questions are, you know, answered by disability aesthetics, but it doesn't mean that the art form of ballet itself is to be discarded. I mean, I think what needs to be discarded and challenged is the positioning of ballet as the exclusive art form. And a recognition, I would love to be able to see and find over 400 years of disability dance history, because we know folks danced. Where's that history? I want to be able to write that history,
I hope you will. I hope you will. But let me just talk for a second about the question you just raised, because to me, ballet is not the things that you just said. It's not those things. It's actually a form of training. That's mainly what it is. It's a training mechanism, that's been developed over those 400 years, and it is a way of learning to add to the body's facility. So it's a way of trying to, and it has some of the things that you said a lot of the time. I totally agree with you. That you have to be within a certain form, but in fact, it can also be seen as something that is a base. That's the trained body in that particular kind of training. Then you can pretty much go wherever you want from there. And there have been, we're in a particularly kind of conservative moment right now, where people think of ballet as something very, very specific and constrained. I'm working right now on George Balanchine, and if you look at ballet in the 20th century, starting from Diaghilev and Nijinsky all the way forward, you get a very different view of what this training can yield, and it can yield a great choreographers and dancers who move a great distance away from it, using it, but moving a very great distance away from it, into everything from burlesque to the theater of the absurd. So it can have a kind of, it can morph in, I think, the ways that I think we should see these trainings as helping us develop the body and free the body in whatever ways are useful to us to express the things we want to express. So that would be my way of thinking about. That's part of why I'm always a little frustrated with the more rigid versions of ballet, as they do sometimes exist, for sure.
Alice, sorry.
Go ahead.
No. So we're both raising our hands here. There's a quick question for you about social media. People think social media is so important for artists to communicate. How do you find accessibility issues with the major platforms such as Instagram?
So there are two parts to that question, right? One is the people who use Instagram and Instagram itself. And the world would be a lot better if the people who used Instagram consistently practiced access. That would make the platform much better and much more accessible and reachable than it actually is. So that would mean that you describe your videos, caption your videos, and that you describe your images as well every time you post. And that would make Instagram, Facebook, Twitter is less of an issue, but also Twitter, if you were able to do that in your practice, either in an alt text or as open description on the text of the post yourself, that would be a very different thing. So I think part of the question here is whose responsibility is disability access? And it is as much the maker and creator responsibility as it is the platform's responsibility. And we're in a moment where artists are coming to that reckoning. Yeah.
Can you say, Alice, maybe Jennifer, it's okay. Can you say something what you're working on now, and maybe also, I think this question is actually relevant. It happens a lot in these things, but how has the last 8-9 months been for you, and what are you going to work on, or what are you working on right now?
Oh, you first, Jennifer.
Oh, I think you should take this one, Alice. I think this is directed at you.
I think we want to hear from both of you, Jennifer. So we'll let Alice go first, and you have a minute to.
I'm writing. I am writing, am in the middle of a book about disability, race, and dance, and dealing with some of the history of disability in, in dance. I it's been the pandemic. I've danced in my bed. I've danced in the bathtub. I've danced outside. I've danced in the tree. I've danced, in a field. I've got poison oak. I've got thistles. I've got all kinds of like burns and rub. I mean, it's the pandemic, and site-specific dance was a thing. So what I'm hoping for is to be able to settle in, and I improve my video editing skills. There we go.
Thank you. Jennifer, how about you?
Well, I'm writing as well. And so there we are, Alice, right? You're back at the Word. So yes, I'm working on a book about George Balanchine, and I'm just chipping away at it.
So I think a lot of people have said thank you, Alice. You're probably following the chat. So someone just said also, and I think also you really modeled, and we really appreciate it also for the Center for the Humanities to actually give us some guidance how to actually be really truly accessible, because we've definitely fallen short in many things we're doing. So I think that's really, it's inspiring to see how it's possible, and it takes a shift that's possible, doable. We are in a university where I always think people are in universities to learn new things, and then somehow sometimes it's still quite slow when we have to learn new things. So we really appreciate that. Jennifer, I'll give you the last word. And Jennifer, maybe you can also say something about other events that are coming up. And Alice and Jennifer, we really hope to have you again. I think I can speak on behalf of the other people who organized this panel, but I especially want to thank the people who joined us tonight or this morning or this afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you for being here with us, and please come back. You can follow all of us on social media, Center for Ballet and the Arts, Center for Disability Studies at NYU, Center for the Humanities. So thank you.
Well, I will just second everything that Uli just said, and I offer a special thanks, Alice, to you for joining us tonight and for the long conversation that we've had, and I hope we'll continue to have on these subjects. So thank you, and thanks to everybody for being here with us.
I think thank you, Jennifer, for circling in. I guess we circled up, we circled around, and we circled in. And I think I've really enjoyed tonight's conversation. So thank you.
Yes, likewise. And thank you all for being here. Good night.